Hi, friends. I'm here again today to do another interview with my good friend Peggy Kepple to discuss some of the themes about my forthcoming book, Chronic Hope: Raising a Child with Chronic Illness with Grace, Courage, and Love, which releases on April 13th of next year. And so this series that we're doing this month for National Diabetes Awareness Month, we're now in week 4. And when you read the book, when you get to the second section, there's a chapter there called Alone. And in this chapter, you are going to meet my friend Peggy, who's actually here today, because I'll share some things in there about what it feels like to be a caregiver of a child with a chronic illness and to feel some of that loneliness. But before I give all that away, I want to introduce Peggy to you. So Peggy was my very first diabetes mom friend. She was the first person that I met just a couple of weeks after my son Austin was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. We met at a JDRF outreach event, discovered that we lived just about 10 minutes away from each other in suburban Philadelphia. Our sons were just about the same age, just like a year and a half apart. But she was a couple of years farther along the journey than I was. And so if you're like me, when you meet somebody like that, you just want to hold on tight, because I knew that I could learn so much from Peggy. And she was also just such a delightful person and became such a fast friend. If I was ever referring to her to someone who didn't know her, I just would say, oh, she's the one who taught me everything I know about T1D. So I am delighted that you guys are going to get to have a chance to hear from Peggy today. As I said, we lived about 10 minutes away from each other, but about a dozen years ago, Peggy left me for the Windy City. So that's where she and her family have been for these last 12 years. But her son, Alex, is now 22. And he was diagnosed with T1D when he was just 15 months old, if you can even imagine. I'm sure she'll tell you a little bit about that shortly. Peggy is a licensed clinical social worker, and she is certified in addictions and grief counseling, but she works with people as young as children all the way up until the gray-haired days. So Peggy is just a wealth of knowledge, information, and support for so many people. So they have their son, Alex, but she and her husband, Jim, also have 5 other sons that they had the privilege of hosting for a year from countries as far away as Finland, France, Spain, Italy, and Paraguay. And if you ask Peggy what her favorite vacation ever was a little over a year ago when they all were united together in Switzerland. Which is a very good place to go when you're getting all those United Nations together in one place. So today, Peggy and I are going to talk about the loneliness that caregivers sometimes feel when they're raising a child with chronic illness. And we're going to look at the importance of having support groups to help you through these times. And I've picked this topic for today because, as I said, Peggy was my first diabetes friend, and this episode is airing during Thanksgiving week. And so I'm very thankful for Peggy. And so I hope that you will appreciate this as just a little Thanksgiving treat. So let's move into our questions. Enough from me. So Peggy, Alex was diagnosed when he was just 15 months old. And I can't even imagine that. Austin was 5, and I thought that was young enough. 15 months must have been really hard. So how did having a very young son with such a complicated disease, how did that leave you sometimes feeling alone or left out? And can you describe a time when that really sticks out in your memory and how you responded to that?
Sure. Thanks, Bonnie. I just want to say one thing before I go into it. You have taught me equally as much. I mean, just with your background with having diabetes in your life prior to your son being diagnosed, I felt like I learned so much from you over the years. And I think Alex had his very first green bean at your house. So, however you made these delicious Trader Joe green beans, he came home and was like, I eat green beans now. So, thank you.
Oh, that's great.
Um,
That's what it is. It's all about community. We're going to first start
yeah,
talking about loneliness and isolation, but it is all about community when you have a child with a chronic illness.
yeah, absolutely. So, I would say, so when Alex was diagnosed, we do not have it in our family. So I didn't even really know what type 1 diabetes was. I only knew about type 2. So it was a rude awakening. And I think for the first year, I was just kind of in that learn everything mode and go forward. He was born in Dallas and we were living there at the time. Um, I was really fortunate to have my best friend, Joan, was a pediatric nurse. So I was just so fortunate to have her. Her son Luke was 2 months older than Alex. We were already doing like daily play dates. She has 2 boys, so we would do that anyway. But I was just really fortunate to be able to, like, she would take him,
Mm.
and because back then he was on insulin shots, and we could get sidetracked on that. But it wasn't like I could have a babysitter anymore. You couldn't have anyone who didn't know really about this disease with someone so young. He was still in diapers. He didn't know what low blood sugar meant or even recognize what it felt like. So I was so thankful I had her immediately in my life. And then JDRF, I think that was the second, because I immediately reached out to them and within a year did our first walk. So I was able to meet some friends in Dallas before moving to Philadelphia when Alex was 4. Um, but the particular time that I think of the most was really the 1 year anniversary of his diagnosis, which is this month. It's the end of October. He was diagnosed right before Halloween. And when the year came up, I said, I'm going to take him out and do something fun. And I took him bowling. He was 2.5. He, pushed the ball down the lane. And I just remember looking at him and being so depressed
Mm.
that this was going to go on forever. This wasn't like I got through a year and it's going to go away. I
Right.
was just really, truly grieving, like, the loss of his health
Yeah.
and what that looked like. And, whether he would live or
Mm.
not, because he is, our only son. I didn't know he'd be our only son then, but um, he's our only child that I gave birth to. And yeah, it was so, it just felt, I felt hopeless at that
Mm.
time. Um, so again, just I think what pulled me through it was the support, the
Mm.
friendships that I had. And
Mm.
so moving from, then by the time he was 4, now I was losing Joan in Dallas,
Yeah.
and moving to Philadelphia it was like starting over, like how, except that now I knew, like, I need a support network.
Mm. So what
So
did you do?
yeah, so luckily I met someone through the school that
Mm.
had a child the same age as him who had type 1 diabetes. And then, Bonnie, I met you. And it was all over. We both, it was awesome for me. The friendships that come from type 1 diabetes are one of the things that I'm most grateful for.
It was very mutual, and our boys too. I mean, they enjoyed playing with one another, which was great. We always had these ideas that, well, maybe someday they'll talk about their diabetes together, which was the last thing they would ever want to do.
Did they ever?
Never, never. But they even wore the same pump, like in
Huh?
the beginning, and they still do now. And so, yeah, it's funny how they've sort of traveled together along this journey too.
Yeah. That was my favorite pump still.
Yeah, the first one, yeah,
Yeah.
Cosmo.
Yeah. Right. Right. I miss it.
So how did you move beyond those early difficult days to a place of deeper hope within yourself?
Um, I think it was very slow. You know, only in retrospect can I kind of look back
Mm.
and say I was able to move forward by recognizing that this was a disease that I
Mm.
was trying to control,
Mm.
and I couldn't.
Mm.
So and Alex, by the time he took it over in later years, I already knew. It wasn't like he was diagnosed at 16 and I thought, oh, well, I could do better than him. I knew that I couldn't control this disease.
Mm.
So I think once I was kind of able to just name it, like
Mm.
say, okay, this is a high maintenance disease and
Yeah.
it's so difficult to control,
Yeah.
that I was able to kind of like through my faith,
Mm.
through honestly practicing mindfulness,
Mhm.
trying to stay in the day and appreciate moments
Yeah.
with him.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at, I can't go out or I shouldn't go on this trip with girlfriends because I can't leave them or I have to go to school every day, it
Right.
became like a switch where I would look at it differently, like, oh, I get to go to school and see his nurse Mary T every day and I love her.
Right. Oh,
Or yeah, or I get to hang out with him alone tonight. Like maybe I'm not going to this event, but I can still like appreciate the time with him.
right.
Or my
That's so
sister Kathy was very involved in our lives early on.
Mhm. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, she became a nurse. She lived with us in Philadelphia for about a year, and well, she lived. Actually, I'll go back. She lived with us in Dallas for a couple months, and then went back to school and got her nursing degree, and
Mm.
then she moved to Philly, and so now here I have this nurse, a live-in nurse.
Right. We could all use one of those.
So yeah, we all need a Kathy in our lives.
We do, we do. But you said something really important there, I think, about like that how so much of what we carry, in this case, we're talking about our feelings of isolation and loneliness. So much of that is because of this unwillingness to let go of the control we want to have over this disease and let go of the way things were and move to a place of acceptance. And then I loved how you talked about mindfulness and staying present and the importance of that when we're trying to move to a place of acceptance is something that we have to practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I would lay in bed his senior year of high school and have so much anxiety on the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
What if he goes away to college and
Mm-hmm.
he goes far away and I can't get a hold of him in his room, and all those things could happen, right,
Right.
Bonnie? All
Right.
those,
Right.
but I could tell myself, that's not yet. That's future me's problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really future him, not me.
Yeah.
But I would say tonight he's in that next room and he's sleeping
Mm-hmm.
and he's safe under this roof. So it really was coming back to today in this moment. And that really helped me once he went away to college, because I would say, okay, he's in college, like he's safe today.
Right, right. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. See, it's so good to have a clinical therapist here with us today. But that is really just, it's so important to just stay present with the day and not to let our minds and our fears just spiral out of control, because it's so easy to do, and that's not going to help anything, and it's not going to change anything. So staying present and looking for the gifts of that moment of he's here in the room next to me, or I get to be with my child today, or oh, I get to visit my child's school today, or I get to go on that field trip with my child today. There's a lot of ways that we can flip these otherwise disappointments on their head and look at them as a gift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Peggy was one of the readers of some of my early chapters of Chronic Hope, and so I was just wondering, Peggy, if there was a chapter that really resonated with you, or a theme, or something that that you hope some of the other folks might have an opportunity to read.
So, it was hard. Like when I read it, everything resonated with me. It did. But I thought the thing that stood out most to me, and I was so grateful that you touched on,
Mm,
was when you talked about your relationship with your husband
mm,
and how this disease, how a chronic disease enter our lives
mm.
and how it can be disruptive.
Yeah.
And I really, really felt that in our own relationship.
Mm,
So, Alex, you have a newborn and that changes the dynamics of your relationship, right? So then a year and a half into that, where we're adjusting, right, to this, baby,
right.
then he's diagnosed with this disease. And I think I knew in the moment that, he was at this being transported in an ambulance to a hospital
Mm,
and I was thrown the word diabetes. I knew that my life was, and his, was forever changed.
mm.
Um, I don't feel like Jim, my husband, knew that in
Yeah.
that moment. And in a lot of ways, I became resentful because I felt like his life didn't change.
Right.
He had outlets. He traveled a lot for work. They would do work dinners.
Right.
So, and I was so controlling on really trying to have these blood sugars. I have charts, Bonnie.
Why aren't they obeying me?
I have charts of every blood sugar and the time and how many times a day we would prick his finger and give him insulin, and it was so obsessive. And of course, like, how can you be a wife or a friend or a daughter or a sister,
Right.
when you're so obsessed in
Right.
this world of trying to control this
Right.
chronic
So
disease that
true.
will not be controlled.
Right. Right. It has a mind of its own. We
Yeah.
know that. Yeah.
So it was that chapter really, and I so appreciate you writing about that
Mhm.
because it was very difficult. We needed to come to a balance in the middle because I was way over here trying to control this and he was like, "Hey, let's back off. What are you doing?
Right.
Let's go to
Right.
Jamaica."
Right.
So it was like, let's come together. Maybe we'll go to Florida
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
together where we have family members like Mary and Teresa can watch Alex. And yeah, so I so appreciate that,
Um,
you putting that in because it was difficult. And it was a definitely more than a bump in our marriage that
yeah.
we were, when
Frustrating.
you look back and you say, oh my gosh, look at all we've been through. Yeah, those
Right.
younger years were really, really hard for us.
Right. Yeah. I think we bump up against that in this. I mean, maybe not every couple does, but we certainly did as well. And when you bump up against that sort of resentment, you just keep thinking, well, I just need to change them. We're just going to push through this boulder, and the boulder is not going to move. It's that we have to change our hearts. We have to practice forgiveness, and that's a really hard thing to do. But just trying to push that boulder, it's not going to move because it's bigger than both of us.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you're right. It's really looking at it from their lens too,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that every time that I felt that oh, my husband's abandoning me, I know he felt abandoned too. Just it was the opposite side of the boulder.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
And I don't know if John felt like this, but for Jim, I'm sure when we finally went out to dinner, he didn't want to talk about blood sugar. you know, and
Imagine
so
that.
yeah, I'm sure he was like, save that for Bonnie. I was like, Bonnie will listen and she'll be really interested.
Oh my goodness, it's so true. Oh my gosh. Well, Peggy, it's been so great having you with me today and catching up and talking a little bit about the loneliness that caregivers can feel. And so we have one more week in this series to go. We're talking about the themes from my forthcoming book, Chronic Hope: Raising a Child with Chronic Illness with Grace, Courage, and Love, that releases on April 13th of next year. But the ebook will come out on January 12th, which is the day after the 99th anniversary of the first use of insulin in the world. So that's a thing to celebrate. And actually, the book is available for pre-order now on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. And if you pop over to my website, bonnieoneil.com, there's available now two advanced chapters of the book, and they're not those first two chapters that you might get on Amazon. They're chapters deeper in. One is talking about shame and blame, so that's almost as good as looking at loneliness. So thanks everyone for listening. Thanks Peggy for joining me, and I'll see you next Monday. Bye.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Bye.
Bye.